Pardon? Why don't just you and I get talking? We'll just move it out. Mr. Cole? I am doing fine, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 200, the Magnuson-Stevens Act. It's a great bill. I'm helping you out in this bill. Really? Yeah.
Rules Committee to come to order, and thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. And by the way, welcome back after a fun weekend. Today, the committee will consider H.R. 200, the Strengthening Fishing Communities and Increasing Flexibilities in Fisheries Management Act. H.R. 2083, the Endangered Salmon and Fisheries Predation.
That's right.
I'm getting used to this. Don, I was in Seattle. I climbed Rainier on July 3rd, 1987. And there was the biggest battle down on the Columbia River, I suppose it's Columbia River, between the salmon people and the what are they, sea lions?
Sea lions. Nothing's changed.
It has not changed at all.
They're still eating everything and anything.
Yeah, they were just ripping the heads off, not eating them. Anyway, I was shocked, so I just went to climb the mountain.
Thank you.
Prevention Act, H.R. 6157, the Department of Defense Appropriations Act for 2019. So, welcome. H.R. 200, which we will discuss first, reauthorizes the Magnuson-Stevenson Fishery Conservation and Management Act, the primary law governing fishery resources and fishing activities in the United States federal waters. 11 years has passed since this act was reauthorized. Federal fisheries are in need of another reauthorization to increase regional flexibility, tailor management practices, and improve data collection, updated and provided for more flexibility within the regulatory scheme governing federal fish hatcheries. Well, I think will better meet the local needs and expand the economic activity and conservation efforts across America. H.R. 2083, which will be discussed second, amends the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972 to reduce predation on endangered Columbia River salmon and other non-listed species. This bill clarifies the authority and streamlines the process to allow for sea lion population management that are declining ESA-listed salmon. That means they're killing the salmon. Steelhead and other non-listed species such as white sturgeon in the lower Columbia River. It also provides ESA-listing salmon in the lower Columbia River, a habitat that can recover while controlling the stocks of sea lions on a limited basis. I also want you to know, and I'm sure you'll hear this testimony today, that the governor of the state of Washington, former member, former colleague Jay Inslee, you may remember him, has been deeply involved in this process, and I believe is supportive of this bill. H.R. 6157, which we'll discuss last, funds our nation's national defense and provides for resources needed to continue our essential military efforts abroad. In total, the bill provides $674.6 billion, an increase of $71.1 billion over fiscal year 2018 enacted levels. It also provides funding, I think, that will help the quality and health of programs for men and women of our armed services and also for the families. The bill also provides $68.1 billion of overseas contingency operations for the global war on terrorism funding. This funding level is consistent with the National Defense Authorization Act, which was approved by the House last month, as well as recently enacted budget agreements. Well-equipped, well-trained, effective military for the common defense of our country is in the interest of all Americans. Also, there is no higher national priority than to protect our nation, and that comes through protecting our men and women, giving them the best resources, the best training, the best equipment. The bill helps preserve our military as the most capable, superior armed force in the world and protecting ourselves and our friends around the globe. So before we go any further, we have two fabulous members who will be providing testimony. Before we go there, I want to yield to the distinguished gentleman, the ranking member, gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin, I just want to recognize two of our interns on the Rules Committee that have joined us today, and we're grateful for their work and for their service to not only the Rules Committee but to our country. First, Alice Hayes, who's studying history at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, and Sadella Farah, who's studying economics and political science at the University of Michigan. And so we're grateful to them for their work, and we're honored that they chose to spend their summer with us. So thank you. Mr. Chairman, I don't have very much to say other than I think those of us on our side continue to be horrified by a situation that has nothing to do with the underlying bills that are before us today, but we're horrified by the crisis that the President has created at our border. More than 2,000 children are in limbo waiting to be reunited with their parents. There's still no clarity on who in the government is tasked with actually connecting families back together and reunifying parents and children based on some of the things that we've heard from the administration over the weekend. It seems to be an afterthought. And we're hearing reports that by some that it's possible that some children may never be reunified with their parents. I mean, I cannot believe that this is happening in the United States, and I cannot believe the insensitivity and the callousness of this president and this administration. And, you know, he created it and he can end it. And, you know, and based on the immigration bills that were brought before us, it doesn't seem we're in this chamber are focused on ending it either. So I point that out because, you know, I don't know whether you were home over the weekend, but I was home in Massachusetts over the weekend, and at every event that I was at, you know, whether it was with businesses or meeting with members in various communities for office hours or at churches or in supermarkets even, people came up to me and said they cannot believe that this is happening in the United States of America. And they're horrified by what's going on, and I share their point of view. I want to welcome our two witnesses. You know, in all candor, I probably, well, I don't agree with the two bills that are before us here today, but I've served with Mr. Young long enough to know that I shouldn't say much about it. So with that, I will yield back my time.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman did take a minute to update us on some feedback about the weekend. In fact, I did go back to Dallas, Texas, where I go every weekend, and without question, there's a lot of conversation and content. I learned over the weekend 12,000 children, or at least not adults, were included in that list of people who came to our borders. Among the 60,000, 10,000, some 83% of those 12,000 children came unaccompanied minors. They were not with a family member, and it's hard for me to understand how you process 12,000 people effectively without making some mistakes, not justifying anything. I would not separate a child from their family member, but what I would say is 10 of the 12,000 may have come across with an adult that they, after watching them for some period of time, figured out they were not their adult, and it makes no sense to me why we would not try and work hard, which perhaps we're doing today, to find out where their parents are. And I, like you, agree we need to find their parents. If I were a parent, I'd want to know where my child was too. So I appreciate the gentleman giving that update. I too have three interns, Brandon Jody, Dallas, Texas, UT Austin, class of 2020, majoring in business. Damian Doolittle, Goodview, Virginia, Campbell University, majoring in Homeland Security, and actually one of my fraternity brothers that I learned about today, Adam Light, who is behind me, goes to Emory University, class of 2020, majoring in political science. Adam, Damian, Brandon, we're glad you're with us today. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, you've already heard that we're delighted that you're here with us today, bringing some important bills that reauthorize piece of legislation and programs that have not been reauthorized at least for 11 years. I think that takes pretty good undertaking to get that through a committee. I appreciate you. The distinguished gentleman is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank all the members, including the ranking Mr. McGovern, for his comments. This legislation is dear to my heart. I was a sponsor of the original legislation with Gary Studs from Massachusetts, and it's been a great success story. And it's actually been one of the bright spots of our legislative endeavors to keep our resources viable, keep our communities livable, and keep the foreigners off our fish. It does need reauthorization. H.R. 200 makes, I believe, improvements. You'll hear other things that it does not. I believe it does. It has a proper balance between the biological needs of fish stocks and, of course, the economic needs of fishermen and communities. That was the original intent of the so-called Magnuson-Stevens Act. As you know, Gary Studs and I wrote this act. I could tell you what it should have been named, but I won't mention that right now. You know, they named it after themselves, but the intent was sustainable yield and economic well-being of communities on the coastal areas, and that has been achieved under this legislation, the Magnuson-Stevens Act. My legislation adds flexibility, which I believe is necessary to rebuild our depleted fisheries, and actually has transparency for the fishermen in science and management, and the requirement for NOAA to provide better accountability on how fees that are collected are used. I think that is very important. It authorizes appropriations for the Act for 5 years. I will say that I do believe I have the support of every state in the coastal areas of the United States in support of this legislation. We have interest groups that are not, but the states themselves do. It does protect commercial as well as recreational fishing interests, and it will allow the councils to do their jobs, which are very important. My manager amendment, which I will talk about in a moment, allows the Commerce Secretary to use recreational fishery surveys conducted by the 5 Gulf Mexican states for red snapper estimates and makes technical changes to the relocation of unused pollock harvest. My language, actually, the bill takes away the Magnuson-Stevens as the top statutory authority for federal fisheries management, taking precedence over the Endangered Species Act, Antiquities Act, National Marine Sanctuaries Act, and National Environmental Policy Act. So Magnuson Act doesn't oversee those, and they all stay in their place. I removed this language. I think it's still correct. Actually, in a good faith effort to make my legislation bipartisan, I'm pleased to count Representative Jane Green and Mark Vesey among the co-sponsors of H.R. 200. They're strong supporters of this legislation, as each coastal member should be. I ask you, to the Committee of Resources, seeks a structured rule, and asks for the text of H.R. 200 as reported by the Committee of Natural Resources to be made in order. The committee also requests you make in order the manager's amendment offered by myself. Finally, I ask you to provide 1 hour of debate evenly divided between the majority and minority bill manager from the Committee on Natural Resources. With that, Mr. Chairman, I gladly answer any questions on legislation that was created many, many years ago in 1973. If you may ask why it was created, because very frankly, I wrote this bill because the foreigners were catching our fish 12 miles offshore. Every state was being damaged. And we were able to write this bill, and it's been one of the great successes. And with that, I yield back my time. I'll answer any questions.
Chairman, thank you very much. I need to add also anything that you or Mr. Huffman brought in writing would be entered in the record without objection. We'll make sure that that happens, and I know we want to complete the record to make sure that our awesome stenographer gets that correctly done. Thank you very much. Mr. Huffman, we're delighted that you're with us, and the distinguished gentleman is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's good to be with the Dean of the House discussing this important bill. The Magnuson-Stevens Act, of course, is a law that governs fishing in the U.S. exclusive economic zone. Members might be more familiar with it had it originally been named the Young Studs Bill, as perhaps it should have been. But it's Magnuson-Stevens, and it is a very important bill. We oppose H.R. 200 because it would roll back important elements of Magnuson-Stevens that have been critical to making fisheries and the fishing industry in the U.S. economically and environmentally sustainable. Congress first passed this law in 1976 with 2 main goals: put an end to unregulated fishing by foreign fleets in U.S. waters and to develop domestic fleets that could reap the economic benefits of our considerable fisheries resources. The law has worked so well that domestic fishing soon replaced foreign fleets, and the U.S. fishing industry is now a model for the rest of the world. The important point here is that each successive reauthorization of this bill has been bipartisan. It's been worked on and voted for by Republicans and Democrats alike because everybody recognized the need to address the number of declining and collapsed fish stocks, and these were also effective and progressive endeavors that drastically improved fishing in our country. In fact, our federal fisheries today have the lowest ever number of stocks that are overfished or subject to overfishing, and a total of 44 stocks have been rebuilt. We should reauthorize this law. We should make improvements to it and modernize it, but we should not discard key provisions that have been so essential to its success. Healthy fisheries are an economic engine in many of our districts. In 2015, commercial and recreational fishing generated $208 billion in revenue, supported 1.6 million jobs. Unfortunately, the version of H.R. 200 before us does not include needed safeguards to prevent overfishing, to ensure science-based catch limits, and to protect our nation's fisheries resources from long-term damage. So I appreciate the Dean of the House's commitment to fisheries and his great work on this issue over the years. I know many members are concerned about the continued sustainability of fishing in this country. Unfortunately, contrary to the previous MSA reauthorizations, this bill does not represent a bipartisan compromise. It was reported out of committee on a strictly party line vote. No Democrats in favor, not a single Democratic amendment was accepted. And despite our efforts since the markup, and despite significant compromises that I have personally offered, we were not able to reach agreement. The bill still contains major new loopholes in critical provisions in Magnuson, catch limits and rebuilding timelines, provisions that, again, have been pillars of the success of this law over many, many years. And without fixing those provisions, this bill represents a weakening of the core MSA tools that are essential to rebuilding fisheries, to keeping them at sustainable levels, and to preventing fish crashes that can devastate the environment and fishing communities. That's why this bill has been opposed by numerous fishing groups from the West Coast to New England to the Gulf of Mexico. In addition, my office has received letters of opposition from hundreds of fishermen, scientists, chefs, restaurateurs, ecotourism operators and businesses, and environmental groups. And many of these letters have asked Congress to do what we've done before, to work in a bipartisan manner to reauthorize this bill, and I think they're right. Congress ought to be able to work together and reauthorize our most important fisheries laws with broad bipartisan and stakeholder support. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Huffman, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I understand that you have a limited time with us, so I'm going to ask that any member of the committee that would wish to engage you on any questions, please feel free to take their shot at you, and understand that Mr. Graves might be taking your place at some point. Sir, how much time do you have to be with us?
I have approximately 5 minutes.
About 5 minutes. Well, here we go. Is there any question from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma? Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I don't have a question. I just want to ask unanimous consent to insert on the record letters opposing H.R. 200, more than 500 chefs, restaurateurs, and seafood dealers, 600 fishermen and businesses, 200 scientists, 109 governmental organizations, 50 divers, and other signatories who wrote to us in Congress opposing this.
Without objection, we'll enter that in the record. Thank you very much. Judge Hastings, okay, let me just open this up. Do you have a question for either Mr. Huffman or the distinguished young chairman? The gentlewoman's recognized. Oh, you do not dare. Oh, you do not dare. I'm sorry. You were very, very genteel in that, and I did not hear you, Ms. Torres. I'm sorry. But that's my fault, not yours. Mr. Woodall?
No questions, Chairman.
All right. Is there any other member that would seek time? The distinguished gentleman from the state of Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is by no means taking a shot at anybody, but there were some questions raised in Mr. Huffman's testimony, and I thought that it'd be, these probably are a couple people that know this issue more than anyone, and we have some other people in the room too that maybe would address, but I'd like to hear a response, particularly about some of the things that are supposedly safeguards that we're walking back. Those aren't the words that were used, but limiting the potential success of them.
If I could respond, Mr. Huffman, his idea of walking back, actually the federal control has not worked in every area. The councils have done a good job in most areas. I've always said that, I wrote this bill, and I know what I'm trying to do. Johnny-come-latelys that don't understand the whole intent sometimes disturb me. There was an effort to make it bipartisan every time I would try to. In fact, the whole idea of taking out the Antiquities Act, All the other things, that came from your side. And I took it out. And I'm saying that this does not hurt the stocks. It does recognize the communities, and every part of this bill came from the industry and the scientists that believe the industry is right and the councils that want the flexibility. To make an arbitrary decision from Washington, D.C. is wrong. And I can get 50 scientists in a room, and 25 don't agree with the other side. So if I thought for a moment this was going to hurt the fishing industry or the communities, I wouldn't be supporting this bill. I will tell you that some of the people don't like the flexibility concept in the councils, but I think they're on site. They're appointed by the Secretary of Commerce. They work together, and we have states intermixed. It seems like maybe they might know a little bit more than in some cases, or somebody else. And when it affects the community, and they know full good and well that the stocks themselves are not endangered, then, in fact, I think they should have that flexibility to do it faster than what's written in the law. There's a difference of opinion, but that's fine, too. I just have to go forth and say this is a good piece of legislation, and I urge that the rule be adopted as I suggested, and urge that, very frankly, think about this. It's not a partisan issue. Is it bipartisan? I got to tell you, I'll be very personal with this. I don't think we've ever got a bipartisan bill out of the committee this year. Everybody's mad at everybody. That's not healthy. And I do not like certain interest groups that don't want to achieve a better goal. I understand their feelings. They get paid for it. But to me, they're prostituting their beliefs and not looking at the real solution that we have in this legislation. But anyway, that's where I am.
Mr. Huffman?
Well, I think our
The gentleman controls time, but I'm trying to.
certainly.
Well, I appreciate that, but thank you, Mr. Young, and Mr. Huffman. If you have a response, that'd be great.
My only response, Mr. Newhouse, is that I think our disagreement is not that we can't work together on some ways in which the catch limits and the rebuilding timeframes can perhaps be made more flexible in appropriate circumstances. That's what this conversation is generally about. It's that we believe the provisions in H.R. 200 are overbroad, and that it's actually dangerous to have broad loopholes that could take us back in the direction of overfishing and fishery crashes. That's the difference about this provision.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that from both of you. You couldn't let them off the hook totally, Mr. Chairman, so I just thought we'd better have some conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delighted. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Ms. Graves, if you'd like to take the distinguished gentleman's place, that'd be great.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. I would like to see us move then, and we will open up the table to others before we move to H.R. 6157. I would like to move now to H.R. 2083. And Mr. Graves, Mr. Huffman, are you here to represent that also?
I am not.
You are not, sir. Thank you very much. I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr.
If you'll please make sure whatever you brought in writing that you leave for awesome stenographer. Thank you very much. This is the awesome one right there. That one right there. Is there any member of the Democratic Party that would wish to represent your party on H.R. 2083 at this hearing? Mr. Graves, we're delighted that you're here. Distinguished gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, H.R. 2083 is legislation introduced by Congresswoman Herrera Butler, our colleague, the Endangered Salmon and Fisheries Predation Prevention Act. Just to help lay the groundwork here, if you look at the Columbia River estuary to Bonneville Dam, approximately 45% of the salmon are taken as a result of sea lions. They're taken, which has a significant impact on the population. If you look at the Willamette River area, you have approximately 25% of the steelhead, wild winter steelhead, that are consumed as a result of these marine mammals. You're having endangered species conflicts, and this is a challenge trying to manage the different endangered species. The state of Washington estimates that there's a 90% chance that the wild winter steelhead are going to become extinct on this current trajectory. So what this legislation does is it provides flexibility to fisheries managers to allow them some takes as a result of the marine mammals in an effort to ensure that we can have healthy population of salmon, steelhead, and other species. It is designed to help provide additional tools to this conflict of various endangered species. The rules are too strict right now, and so that's why the state of Washington, the state of Oregon, and let me get the other groups. I'm sorry. The state of Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and for example, the Northwest River Partners, as well as a number of tribes and public utility districts, all support this legislation. It is bipartisan legislation. It did obviously get reported out of the House Natural Resources Committee, and I'll just say it again. It simply provides flexibility to fisheries managers to ensure that we're using all the tools in the toolbox to allow for the proper management of sea lions, other marine mammals, and ensuring that we have sustainable fisheries of our salmon, steelhead, and others. And let's keep in mind that ratepayers on Bonneville Dam, for example, end up spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to improve habitat and trying to restore salmon. And in this case, we're having sea lions come in, and as I mentioned, end up losing 45% of them on the Columbia River estuary to the Bonneville Dam alone. And so this is simply common sense. It provides better science, better resources, and it's in line with what the Northwest states are requesting. So we urge adoption of a rule that would provide 1 hour for each side. It's House Report 115-79, and happy to answer any questions that you have. And Mr. Newhouse, I would love the same question from you on HR 200 if you're looking for a question.
Mr. Graves, thank you very much. You know, when we find that there are endangered species and we're trying to take care of both, it is a hard battle. Have you witnessed this battle, or you're simply representing this side?
I have witnessed this battle, and in a previous life, I was actually a resource manager and ran into similar conflicts like this. And in many cases, federal laws, state laws, and others end up tying our hands on the best solution. No one wants to have extinct salmon, extinct sea lions, seals, anything else. And in some cases, the rules are just too strict, and this is one of them.
Would these be considered an agricultural product to the state of Washington?
I perhaps yield to the gentleman from Washington.
We may ask him in a minute. What I'm saying to you is get ready, because you're going to find out.
But I think it is an agricultural product when you look at the definition compared to other.
Do you think that we're giving back to the states, or at least in this instance, the state of Washington, the state of Idaho, the state of Oregon, the state of Montana? I believe those were the 4 states that you recognized. We're giving them the ability for them to manage their own issues, or are we trying to say that this has got to be done in one way necessarily? Because they may be different circumstances, habitats, different issues, different timing, different.
I think it absolutely is giving them more flexibility. It's giving them the ability to manage their own resources and to tailor a solution for the challenges that they're experiencing.
Well, I received a briefing, I don't know, today and maybe last week about the effects of some governors being involved. And I applaud those governors for getting involved in this. And I perhaps applaud you for making sure, and Mrs. Herrera Butler for making sure that the governors can win in this circumstance, because I believe it is a natural resource issue for them. And notwithstanding it's probably also a federal issue, I appreciate yielding that type of answer to them. Chairman Cole? No question. Gentleman does not seek time. Is Judge Hastings. Ms. Torres, you seek time? All right, thank you very much. Any Republicans seek time? The distinguished gentleman from the state of Washington.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got to say, all of you as members, when another congressman talks so eloquently and convincingly about your state, helping to make the case of a very important, critical issue, you got to think that some of your words are getting through to somebody. So I appreciate Mr. Graves coming here and talking so positively about an issue that truly is very, very important to the fisheries industry, to the recreational industry, to our natural environment in the Pacific Northwest. And this has been going on for a long, long time. I'm proud to say that I'm a co-sponsor of this bill, along with many other people, to try to address something that has already been said, the predation issue and the number of salmon that are being literally eaten, which I've seen personally. And all you got to do is go to the Bonneville Dam, and there are viewing windows where you can watch the salmon as they migrate upstream. I literally have seen not only the pool in front of the dam where the sea lions are just having a heyday down there. It's literally a smorgasbord, but you can watch fish go through the lucky ones go through the viewing windows with teeth marks in them. It just happened to match the sea lions that are down below. It truly is a huge issue. A big, 45% of the spring Chinook, according to NOAA, are eaten by the sea lion. So it's huge. And just to give you an idea, I think approximately the time I was born, back in the 1950s, there were about 30,000 California sea lions. Today, there are over 300,000. And a big part of that increase in their number, and they're not endangered, by the way. They may be protected, but they certainly are not an endangered species, at least to my knowledge. But a big part of that explosion in their population is because of the salmon in the Columbia River, which, by the way, my constituents, my fellow ratepayers in Pacific Northwest, over time have spent almost $16 billion in improving salmon runs in the Columbia River system.
And if I can just quickly clarify my remarks, I think I did misstate. So the conflict is between the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act. So you're correct. I think I did say that incorrectly.
Okay. But but you made the point very well. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit for the record several very good letters. One from the Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakama Nation, which happens to be in my district. Letters from the governors of both of Idaho, Oregon, and the state of Washington supporting this bill. A letter from the Coastal Conservation Association, which includes states around the country, supporting this legislation, as well as a letter from the Public Power Council and the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, all in support of this legislation that really, I think, does make a great attempt to help get some control over this issue and help an endangered species survive. So I thank the good gentleman from Louisiana again for being so eloquent, speaking about an issue in the Pacific Northwest, and would yield back my time.
Without objection, anything the gentleman would choose to enter the record will be accomplished. Thank you very much. Does the distinguished gentleman from Texas have any questions? Thank you very much, Dr. Burgess. Mr. Graves, I want to thank you for taking time to be here with us today, bringing a piece of legislation that seemingly helps out states and gives them a better answer, updates a reauthorization process, and makes it better, and I want to thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you.
Is there any member of the body that would seek to be heard on H.R. 200 or H.R. 2083? The distinguished gentleman from California would be recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, Matt, if you want to do this too, please come up. I'm sorry, if there's anyone that would wish to give testimony under H.R. 200 or H.R. 2083, please come to the table here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Chairman, welcome. We're delighted that you're here. Please remember anything brought in writing we'd appreciate without objection be in the record and give them to our distinguished young stenographer.
Will do. So this amendment to the text of H.R. 200 contains text from the Shark Fin Sales Elimination Act. Specifically, the amendment would prohibit the possession, purchase, or sale of detached shark fins. The amendment will address steep shark population declines resulting from the global shark fin trade, and it builds on previous congressional action and several similar state bans. Texas, for example, has a state ban in place, so do many coastal states. This is important because sharks are apex predators, and as such have the ability to drastically impact our ocean's ecosystems by changing the population levels of creatures below them in the food chain. For example, a decrease in the population of tiger sharks can lead to an increase in prey species, such as an increase in rays, in monk seals, in reef sharks, which in turn could cause a decline in tuna, as we've heard, in salmon, in mollusks. Putting this in terms that Mr. McGovern might appreciate, the more shark fin harvested, the higher the cost of clam chowder. But this is the impact that it has on tuna and other fish. The proposal enjoys broad bipartisan support. We have 239 co-sponsors. Among those co-sponsors, we have 8 committee chairmen, and thank you for your support, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
And, Mr. Chairman, we have a majority of the Natural Resource Committee members. This is an issue that many members feel very passionate about, and many, including Chairman McCall and Representative Calvert, have weighed in with the committee and with leadership asking that it be moved to the floor. Beyond this support, it also makes sense fiscally and economically. The CBO has found that the new enforcement requirements pay for themselves. Additionally, by protecting our shark populations, we are bolstering the ever-growing shark ecotourism industry. This is a huge industry in Florida, huge industry in California. In California, we've got 134 shops. This is very important to them. In Florida, there's 185 shops supporting this legislation. That has built out an economy centered on shark encounters. In 2016 alone, that brought in revenue $221 million in Florida and fueled over 3,700 jobs. This obviously dwarfs that of the market of the entire domestic shark fin market, which in 2016 was 850,000 in exports. I'm a firm believer in the principle that when the United States leads, other countries will follow. And that's the most important aspect of this, is how do we get China to quit doing this? And there's been a lot of pressure, and let me tell you where it's worked. We've seen this with, by the way, in the past we saw it with elephant and rhino horn. Okay, when we passed our legislation here on the ivory trade, after we took action, China acquiesced to pressure and shut down its ivory trade. We're seeing right now the impact of this. Last year, in response to pressure associated with this bill, Air China and China Southern Air announced they would no longer allow shark fin cargo. And I can only imagine what impact signing this proposal into law will have in the United States and around the world. It is very important in terms of the balance, and I encourage you to do the right thing and make this amendment in order. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I come to advocate for amendment number 25 on H.R. 200, and my purpose is to kill some lionfish in a way that is bipartisan and does not cost the federal government any measurable amount of money. In the words of NOAA ecologist Dr. James Morris, the lionfish may prove to be one of the greatest threats of this century to our Atlantic reefs. In the warm waters of the Caribbean, off the coast of Florida and the Gulf of Mexico, and also in the Atlantic Ocean, lionfish are decimating our reef fish populations. A lionfish can consume 65 juvenile fish off the reef in one sitting. A female lionfish will release up to 30,000 eggs every 2 to 3 days. A female lionfish will release up to 10 million eggs in a lifetime. They're broadcast spawners, so the eggs will go to the surface and then oftentimes enter the loop current and impact a number of fisheries throughout the warm waters of the Gulf and the Atlantic. This legislation seeks to address that problem, not by spending a lot of money, but by using our existing resource to protect the resource. It creates a voluntary program whereby states can choose to accept 100 lionfish tails representing dead lionfish in exchange for one tag for someone to be able to go and catch a prized reef fish out of season. And the principal purpose of that would be that if someone has killed 100 lionfish, they most certainly have saved at least one valuable reef fish. And this creates incentives for divers. It also creates incentives for technology companies that want to come up with innovative new ways to harvest the lionfish. The lionfish is delicious, and my theory is that anything that is delicious, we ought to be able to harvest out of existence. I yield back.
Okay. Chairman Cole? No questions. Mr. McGovern?
I support making their amendments in order, and with Mr. Royce's amendment, I will look forward to supporting on the floor if it's made in order, and you've reminded me how important it is with the clam chowder reference, so thank you. Yeah, absolutely, you got me. I'm
Caught
aboard.
on that one, didn't
I
you?
yield back.
Thank you very much. Judge Hastings.
I support making both amendments in order, Mr. Chairman.
Judge Hastings, thank you very much. Ms. Torres.
I just want to support Chairman's amendment. California was one of the first states that led in this effort. It caught world attention. It is a brutal act against sharks as their fins are cut, they drown in the ocean. They're often thrown right back into the ocean, and they have no way to swim. So thank you for bringing this up.
If I could respond to that, Congresswoman Torres. One of the things that really moved me was talking to a friend of mine who was on the Galapagos Islands. And, you know, that's one of the great sanctuaries in terms of, and there washing up on the beach are all of these carcasses. He went down to see what they were. Dead sharks, missing only that dorsal fin. He was talking to me about just the irony of it. But thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I've seen much of this on, I enjoy National Geographic, Ed, you know that, and I've seen much that's said about the depletion of the oceans based upon this issue.
Yeah, I would just also ask, of all the things we do here today, this gentleman's amendment, I think, may be the most important in terms of the long haul for those of us that's seen what's happened in the Caribbean, and I want to thank my colleague for offering that amendment.
Is there any other member of the committee that would seek to offer any observations or questions with our distinguished panel? Gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate it. If you'll please, Matt, please make sure anything you brought in writing you leave for our awesome stenographer. We'd appreciate that also. Is there any other member that would seek to be heard from for the committee? Turn to H.R. 200, H.R. 2083. Seeing none, this now closes the hearing portion of H.R. 200 and H.R. 2083. We would now, the committee would make itself available to hear from the distinguished gentlewoman from Texas and the distinguished gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Filskowski. We'll have you please come on up here. We'll call up H.R. 6157, Department of Defense Appropriations Act 2019. Pete, we're delighted that you're with us. We're always hopeful that when you and the distinguished young gentlewoman from Fort Worth come together, that we not only hear about the activity related to the men and women of the military and their families, but how to offer support for them, and know that there are few, if any, members that have a better handle not only on this issue of the current needs of the United States military, but also the needs of the future as we look across the globe. I don't need to discuss with you, you already know this, the Russian influence of their army, tanks, vehicles, and other issues. And when you think about the Chinese, their new Navy that is, when you look at the videos that they're prepared, they're disciplined, they have a philosophy, and you know they are not there for show. And both of these adversaries at this time to the United States of America need to be understood, studied, and we need to be prepared for that which lies ahead. So we're delighted that both of you are here with us today. Without objection to both of you, whatever you brought in writing, if you could please leave it for our stenographer, we'd appreciate that. Gentlewoman from Fort Worth, Texas, distinguished young chairwoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to testify in front of you today in support of the fiscal year 2019 Defense Appropriations Bill. I ask the committee to grant the appropriate rule to ensure expeditious consideration of this important bill. This bill provides $675 billion for defense, which is nearly $20 billion above the current year's levels, and it's consistent with the top line in the House-passed authorization bill. Thanks to the bipartisan budget agreement, we have the resources necessary to reverse the decline in our military's readiness while making necessary adjustments and investments to preserve our military superiority against future adversaries, as you mentioned. The fiscal year 2018 Defense Appropriation Act took the first step to rebuild our military's readiness, and the bill before you is the next critical step as it builds on the readiness gains made in fiscal year 2018 and makes investments necessary to build a more lethal, resilient, and rapidly innovating joint force as called for in Secretary Mattis' National Defense Strategy. It does this by taking care of our troops, providing additional manpower, and fully funding a 2.6% pay increase. It provides additional funding for key readiness programs and robustly funds maintenance of equipment and facilities. The bill includes specific investments in several areas, such as ground mobility by adding additional Strykers, Abrams tanks, and other vehicles, air superiority by adding increased quantities for key platforms, including the Joint Strike Fighters, Apaches, Lakotas, Blackhawks, Osprey, and C-130s. Shipbuilding by adding funds for 12 Navy ships, 2 more than were requested. Research and development by funding significant increases to maintain our military's technological edge. And defense health by adding $752 million over the request for medical research. Resources are also provided to support the Secretary's effort to work by, with, and through our allies and partners to help share the burden while protecting America's interest around the world. The bill before you reflects the advice we received through hearings, briefings, and meetings with the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the leadership of the military services, and other national security experts. It also takes into account the input and advice of House members. The subcommittee received over 6,600 requests from our House colleagues, and we worked to incorporate as many ideas as possible into the bill. In closing, I would want to recognize my ranking member, Pete Visklosky. Pete has been a tremendous partner throughout the development of this bill, and it's better because of his input. I thank the committee for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Chairwoman Granger, thank you very much. I concur with your assessment. Will tell you that as I watched Pete walk in today, I knew from his past of his commitment, not only his career that he is spending in the Appropriations Committee where he works side by side with you, but more importantly, the pride of authorship of the bill that is here today. We're delighted to have him, and thank you for your kind words for your dear friend and mine, too. The distinguished gentleman is recognized.
Chairman, thank you for your kind words, and I simply would suggest to the committee that the chairwoman has summarized the bill very adequately. I also would compliment her on her work. She has been just absolutely bipartisan, has been transparent, and there is not a member in this body who has come to this subcommittee with a concern or request that has not received full consideration, whether or not they have received full satisfaction. At the beginning, I would also say that I hope, despite the privilege of appearing before you, Mr. Chairman, this is the only time I appear before you for the fiscal year 2018 Defense Appropriations Bill. Since last year, we were here 4 times. I might just say that I would hope there is an open rule on the assumption that that probably is not going to be the case, and we will have a structured rule. Would hopefully consider making sure that it is amendments that are of serious nature that are allowed, as well as those that would not be subject to a point of order absent a rule. The final thing, assuming again that for most amendments we would have 10 minutes of debate, 5 on each side, I'm certain there will be several significant amendments. For example, the authorization of the use of force that perhaps the committee would consider allowing a larger time frame for, so as many members as possible could be heard. Having said that, again, I simply appreciate working with the chairwoman. I do think this is an excellent product and would ask for the appropriate rule.
Thank you very much. I have not looked at, although I received last week what I think was a full briefing, I have not fully vetted what you have done. But for both of you, the Guard is an important component. You and I both recognize the Guard is there under the auspices of governors also, and their work, the important work that they do. Is there anything in this bill that addresses necessarily the federal component of how that needs to be relooked at, about words and actions or legislation in that regard, or is that relationship strong and you did not receive any input on that?
The relationship is strong, for sure, and I'm not aware that we have anything in the bill that addressed that because we didn't receive any.
Well, the Guard, as you know,
Yeah.
that does not receive necessarily all of the components of the equipment that they need that they would be fighting with. And I did not know whether you were looking at this in terms of necessarily a projection as the Pentagon builds out its needs for forces that might be within the Guard as they enter the timeframes of what might be necessary for overseas commitments, and to make sure they're receiving the correct training, the correct equipment, the opportunities. And it's a real question about what about that then?
As a former mayor, I worked with the Guard in many ways, and I have a great respect for them. For the equipment, you're right, there was an issue. We put $1.3 billion for the National Guard equipment in this bill.
And I would
Is
suggest,
that
Mr. Chairman,
in
that is
addition
a-
to, or is that as has been in the past?
No, it's
In
in addition
addition.
to.
In addition to.
It's in addition to, it was an increase.
Well, I felt like from the discussions that I had with a number of Guard personnel that they were requesting, because of the backbone of their service, and to make sure. So would this be done on some priority basis and looking ahead, where the Pentagon or probably the Army necessarily would be looking ahead and saying, these are the elements, these are the Guard units that would be going, we need to give them
We
the
looked
equipment?
we had classified briefings from all the branches to say, so they could tell us exactly what they needed and where they were short. In this, we had 15 additional Blackhawks, 6 Apaches, 8 C-130s, and that was all additional for the Guard. And they were specific about what they needed.
It's specific about what they need. And then the allocation of that would be based upon determining when they would be fulfilling those backfill roles. Well, I thank you. This goes right in line with what both of you have said. You spent a great amount of time to listen and to try and fill that. The Guard, the men and women that are there, are doing an enormous job. I've run across them at the border. Air platforms that they had there, I've run across them as they are in defense of this nation and in other nations and supporting that. I'm very happy. I guess perhaps lastly, I would say this. I don't think that readiness necessarily of the active military or the Guard is a question right now, but I continue to see live content that are warnings from the military about the number of people that are ready in this country to, if we did need help, the civilian population of 10th, 11th, and 12th graders is not up to where they would physically pass military readiness, and I've heard it's as high as 7 out of 10. Do you have any content, or was that part of any of the discussion that you have had? Pete?
Mr. Chairman, you're exactly correct. The department estimates that 71% of Americans aged 17 to 24 are ineligible for military service because of either physical or mental health issues, because of lack of educational attainment or a criminal record, which really points out that the defense of this nation is very focused on the people of this country, and we can't forget that part of the budget as well. But it also behooves us, and certainly the chairwoman has been front and center to make sure that for those who are qualified who join, that they are as well-trained, as well-prepared as they can possibly be, so they can be as safe and effective as it efficient. And certainly, Chairwoman and the committee members have strived to do that.
Secretary Mattis, in his testimony before us, said that his number one priority was readiness. And when we came back, I said, as we were talking, you know, sometimes you're talking and you don't realize you're talking past someone. And when he was talking readiness, I'm thinking equipment. And I had to go back to him and said, yeah, he said that it is training, and gave some very specific instances where he said our readiness was not adequate. So that was his number one priority, and that's how he put it that way.
Certainly, our assets of our OTC programs, other avenues that take place are important. I would hope that that would continue to be a priority for us to equally speak about, because it's a concern to me. It's a concern for our fire departments, police departments, as they see another generation of people who are either physically or mentally unprepared to assume the role of protecting this nation. And it's interesting. Thank you very much, Chairman Cole. I must, as I acknowledge Tom, he seems to like the Appropriations Committee.
Yeah, I hope so. He does it really well. We depend on his liking that.
When Chairman Freelyhausen was here, I had a problem when he talked about his favorite chairman. I think he was talking about Rodney, but I'm not sure. Mr. Chairman.
Well, these are my favorite subcommittee chairman and ranking member. And I have to say, I don't have a lot of questions because I have the privilege of sitting on this subcommittee, but I've gotten to be there under three exceptional chairmen. Madam Chairman, I think you're the best of the three, quite frankly. And I am so proud of the work on this subcommittee and staff work, and under your leadership, turning around where the military was headed. And frankly, a lot of people in Congress deserve credit because we had to come to a larger deal, obviously, to get the resources that we desperately needed to get to your subcommittee. But the way you and my good friend from Indiana have worked together, you know, it came out of the subcommittee without a dissenting vote. I think it probably was pretty much the same in the full committee. But regardless, I mean, this has been an exceptionally bipartisan effort. You know, I do hope we have some of those discussions that Mr. Viscoski mentioned on the floor. I actually share his view on the need for a new AUMF, and that's something we need to grapple with. And although that's probably not appropriate on this bill, what we need is Mr. Royce to take that up, and because you'll be subject to a point of order. But this is just a really solid bill. It's really well thought through. The committee hearings were exceptional. Member participation was high. And the chairman and ranking member did everything they possibly could to listen to the members on the committee and to work with our professional military. And again, probably the most important thing this year that gets done in appropriations is reversing the decline of the American military, putting it back on sound footing. I'll tell you, Mr. Chairman, that was done on a bipartisan basis, bipartisan agreement through the full Congress at the leadership level, and then bipartisan cooperation and working hand in hand. I don't think we ever had a partisan spat or debate in the entire course of consideration. I can't recall any such thing. It's just genuinely thoughtful. I do worry that next year, and Mr. Viscoski is warned of this, and so is the chairman, you know, we once again face sequestration, and you know, Congress didn't come to a large enough deal to give us a 4-year relief from that. So if we're not very careful next year, the very good work of the last 2 years could all be undone in a single bad decision by Congress. And again, I voted for the Budget Control Act, was happy to do it because I was assured we'd deal with entitlements, and we never did. And what happened then was havoc wreaked on every other budget and the discretionary side, but particularly this budget, which is so critical to all of us. So hope we pass your bill across the floor. I'm sure we will. I know you'll negotiate in good faith with our colleagues in the Senate. I don't think you're going to be all that far apart, largely because we have a larger budget deal, and so we know what the money is. The authorizations seem to be moving very, very well. So this is something this Congress could get done. I think could get done before September 30th, as long as the bill isn't held hostage for other things in the appropriations process. And I really hope we don't, because those other things can be worked out too. We've shown three years in a row that let the appropriators do their job, they'll come to a deal. And it'll be a deal. When we passed the omnibus earlier this year, it had 145 Republicans and 111 Democrats. This is a bill that could probably have 220-odd Republicans and 180 Democrats. I mean, we'd get pretty close. So I would hope that we let you get your work done and, again, not only pass the bill across the floor, let you go to conference, bring that bill back. That's over half the discretionary budget could be taken care of. Remove White House complaints about getting, a gigantic bundle. This is the most important single piece of the appropriations process. So I would urge my colleagues to talk to their leadership on their respective sides and see if we can't get this one done for the American people and for the men and women that put their lives on the line for us every day. They don't need a CR in September. They need a bill done, right. And the good things in this bill need to proceed on pace and in a way that, again, improves the product defense. So with that, I just want to thank my two friends. I am proud of both of you. I'm proud of the way you worked together. I'm proud of the committee you led, Madam Chairman, the great work that came out of it, and look forward to working with you in the rest of the process.
Thank you.
Yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Cole. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank our two witnesses for all their hard work. I have some substantive issues that were with the bill overall, but I appreciate the bipartisan way that you work together, and as a show of my appreciation, I will not say anything more. I'll yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia. Gentleman does not seek time. Judge does not seek time, Ms. Torres. Gentleman's recognized.
Just briefly, I wanted to get your response on how did you work closely with the Coast Guard on meeting their needs to update their equipment. I had an opportunity to travel with them to Puerto Rico last year with Majority Leader McCarthy and Chairman Bishop. And part of the trip, we learned that their equipment is so old that it makes it very difficult for them to be able to deploy sometimes during their, search and rescue missions that they have to take. So I'm wondering how those conversations went and if we were able to meet at least part of their needs.
Congresswoman, clearly the Coast Guard is very important for any number of reasons, including the defense of this country. I would point out the way our committee, and sometime it appears not to make sense, is divided. The Coast Guard is actually under the jurisdiction of the Homeland Department for that particular subcommittee. But clearly, given their responsibilities in the department, there is a lot of interchange, so your question is certainly apropos.
On all the branches of our military, there were some really large disappointments. Air Force we lost so many pilots because they didn't have planes to fly because we didn't put enough maintenance money in. I got a call that I thought was absurd, said I hear that they're going into museums and taking parts out of planes in museums. I said, I'm sure that's not true. Well, it was true. So it was that bad. So everything we can do that bring them up to the equipment they should have, the training they should have, it's a matter of pride. And they really paid attention in last year's bill. It would be a terrible thing to go, as you said, go back to a continuing resolution. It would be a real disappointment to them because we promised them that we would do it and we would do it the right way.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to highlight the fact that we do need to put more attention to that. Specifically, the Coast Guard trains quite a bit with our local police departments that have maritime jurisdiction.
Thank you very much. Dr. Burgess?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just really have a couple of questions. As Secretary Mattis, when he came and talked to us early in the year, this was before the passing of the big appropriations bill in March, but he said he needed $700 billion for that fiscal year that we were in, and $716 billion for this fiscal year. Big numbers and disturbing numbers, but nevertheless, that's what he said he needed. So have we provided that? I don't see that number in the Department of Defense appropriation.
We're at essentially $671 billion.
Yes, it's part of it. Ours is only part of it because energy and water is also part of that.
Right.
Energy and water is part of that. What's the other one?
Military construction.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you for answering that. And for the gentleman from Indiana, of course, I was paying rapt attention during every word of your testimony, but did I understand you to say that you were supporting this?
Yes.
And you will, as the bill as submitted to the Rules Committee, if it were to appear on the floor unchanged, you would vote in favor of it?
We have an amendment process before us, so I never answer a hypothetical question, Doctor, but voted for
But the
the
very
passage of
good
this
product
bill.
that you
It's-
have delivered to us.
It's an exceptional product, and I voted for it when we reported it out of committee.
And, I mean, you know, because you brought it up yourself. I wasn't going to bring it up, but you did. You were up here 4 times in the last fiscal year. If I recall correctly, you got a little bit more critical every time that you were up here. Sometimes it was late at night, and I'll grant you that we perhaps all were a little testy. But at the same time, it was not your United States House of Representatives that posed the problem to funding the Department of Defense. It was the other body with which we have to contend. So are you prepared to articulate to your colleagues on the other side of the Capitol Rotunda that this is an important bill and we shouldn't play politics with the nation's defense?
Doctor, I'm happy to do that with every member of Congress on both sides of this building. I have been an appropriator since I started on the staff of this committee in 1977, and the committee I serve on, I have the privilege to serve on, gets its work done. We have wasted more money because of the uncertainty we have created.
And I
so
do
I
not
absolutely agree with your assertion, and will do everything possible to make sure that not only this bill, but the other 11 bills get passed in a timely fashion, getting back to the chairman's earlier remarks that if 71% of young people in this country can't even join the military, we've got to invest in this country too.
Well, again, as you know from your 4 trips up here last fiscal year, we had a problem with a 60-vote rule in the Senate. And, Mr. Chairman, I will just offer the observation. It is hard to pass a budget. The Budget Reform Act of 1972 or 73, whenever it was, recognized that and said, by golly, to pass a budget will only require 51 votes in the Senate. My observation, it is hard to pass spending bills now, but it's important to pass spending bills. Mr. Chairman, it's time to go to a 51-vote majority in the Senate on a spending bill as well. And I appreciate the work you all have done. I hope it is successful in getting across the finish line. Every single appropriations bill, but this, I think we all agree, is the most important. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Doctor, if I could just make a note, every year is a new year, but it is my impression the Senate has passed the first minibus. So there is, if you would, progress being made here.
When I said that the bill is better because Mr. Wisłowski's partnership, I meant that. There was a time he came in and said, Kay, I have a problem with this bill. I said, what's your problem? He explained what he saw, and I said, you know, you're right, that is a problem. Can you see if you can figure it out? And he did. He came back the next day and said, this is what I propose. And I said, you're right, that strengthens the bill. It's been that sort of a working relationship, and that does make it better, without a doubt.
And I don't want to prolong the discussion here, but I also think many of our colleagues are under the impression that all the chairwoman and I and the members of the subcommittee want to do is just shovel money out and give it to the department blindly. That is also not true. There have been a number of meetings where people have not been timely. They have not given us a good factual basis to spend money, and there are pages of report language accompanying this bill, taking certain departments of the military to task. Not that we don't have a profound respect for the chiefs and the secretaries, but some people did not act appropriately or provide the constitutional respect to the committee.
Yeah, you got to show your work. You're absolutely correct. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back his time. Distinguished gentleman from Georgia, distinguished gentleman from Alabama. No question. Does not seek time. The distinguished gentleman from Freedom, Colorado. The distinguished gentlewoman from Wyoming.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank both the chairman and the ranking member for your work on this important bipartisan bill. I'd like to echo what a number of my colleagues have said, Dr. Burgess, in terms of what the Senate rules are doing. And I think it's important for us to understand it's not just sort of the normal dysfunction that we've seen in the past, but when we have the dysfunction that we do in our budget process, we're putting lives at risk. And when the Senate is unable to pass a defense appropriations bill or unwilling for political purposes to do that, we are making it tougher for our men and women in uniform to defend us. And I just have to say there are a few things that have had a bigger impact on me in my time in this body than having the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs and our combatant commanders look us in the eye on the Armed Services Committee I serve on with my colleague, Mr. Byrne, and say no foe in the field has done more damage to our armed forces than the United States Congress has. So we've got to get this bill passed through the House. We've got to get the Senate to take it up. And we've got to make sure, as Chairman Cole mentioned, that we don't go back down the path of sequestration again once we get through this fiscal year, because that's hugely damaging. So I just want to thank you both for your work on this and really urge our colleagues over on the other side of the Capitol to take this up and not play politics with the funding for our men and women in uniform. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be a member of the Civil Air Patrol and try and help the Civil Air Patrol. And part of our mission is to make sure that young men and young women have some bit of acumen about not only the world we live in, science, nature, but also about discipline, honor, character, and the ability to be prepared to perhaps enter the United States military or to go to an academy. And I want to tell you that it makes me feel really good every time I'm with the Civil Air Patrol to see these young people and the leadership of that organization take time to build within those people the esprit, the knowledge, and the credentialing that will be necessary. So it's my hope that I look for the Civil Air Patrol in particular in here, did not see it. I will do my homework, but I want to thank both of you for making sure that that is one of the avenues I think that can begin better preparing young people for what lies ahead for the country and for them also. So thank you very much. Is there any other question anyone from this committee has for our two distinguished guests? I want to thank both of you. Please remind you that if you'll, whatever you brought in writing will be left for our awesome stenographer, allowing her the ability to complete that record. We will be taking up a series of amendments that we will learn here in a minute that we're going to make in order to begin that debate discussion. And I want to thank both of you not only for your attention to detail, but your feedback to us about those most important activities so that we maintain the ability to get every single person's vote in this body based upon the knowledge that the United States military is the backbone of our nation, and we appreciate and respect them very much. And I think it's, as has been said around the table, I think it would be a big mistake for us not on October 1st to make sure that they're fully funded for the year. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, is there any other member that would seek to come give testimony? Seeing none, this now closes the hearing portion for HR 6157. Actually, we will be in more testimony later, but this closes the hearing portion for the first part of the bill. Chairman, now being received a motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 6157, the Department of Defense Appropriations Act 2019, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriation. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 115-77 shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended for failure to comply with Clause 2, Rule 21, except beginning on page 86, line 1, through page 86, line 7. The rule makes an order only those further amendments printed in Part A of the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against amendments printed in the report. The rule provides that no further consideration of the bill shall be in order except pursuant to a subsequent order of the House. The rule provides that the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations and their respective designees may offer up to 10 pro forma amendments each at any point for the purpose of debate. The rule provides that during the consideration of H.R. 6157, it shall not be in order to use a decrease in the Overseas Contingency Operations Fund to offset an amendment that increases an appropriation not designated as Overseas Contingency Operations Funds or vice versa, but does not apply to amendments between the houses. Section 2 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 2083, the Endangered Salmon and Fisheries Predation Prevention Act, under a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Natural Resources. The rule provides all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule makes an order as original text for the purposes of amendment, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 115-79 and provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against that amendment in the nature of a substitute. The rule makes an order only those further amendments printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, shall not be subject to a demand for division of the chair, of question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in Part B of the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Finally, the rule provides that H.Res. 952 shall be laid on the table.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma. I'm going to yield myself 1 minute for the explanation of this rule. One rule, two bills, H.R. 2083, Endangered Salmon and Fisheries Predation Prevention Act, structured rule, 1 hour debate provided to the chair and ranking member of the Committee on Natural Resources. Makes an order 3 Democratic amendments, one motion to recommit. H.R. 6157, Department of Defense Appropriations Act of 2019. General debate with rule, 1 hour debate provided to the chair and ranking member of the Committee on Appropriations. Makes an order 24 amendments. Exposes an intel provision to Clause 2, point of order. Subsequent rule will provide for additional amendments to H.R. 6157. The rule will table H.Res. 952, the first rule for H.R. 4760, Goodlat 1. H.R. 200, Strengthening Fisheries Communities and Increasing Flexibility in Fisheries Management Act. We completed the testimony and we'll complete our work tomorrow on this issue. Is there amendment or discussion to this rule? Seeing none, the vote will now be on the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
Ayes have it, ayes have it.
Yes, a roll call, Mr.
Gentleman asks for a roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? Aye. Mr. Collins? Aye. Mr. Collins? Aye. Mr. Byrne? Aye. Mr. Byrne? Aye. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Buck? Aye. Mr. Buck? Aye. Ms. Cheney? Ms. Cheney? Aye. Mr. McGovern?
No.
Mr. McGovern? No. Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Polis? Mrs. Torres? Mrs. Torres? No. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman? Aye.
Clerk will report the total.
8 yeas, 3 nays.
The motion is agreed to, and accordingly, the distinguished gentlewoman from the state of Wyoming, Mrs. Cheney, will be handling this for Republicans.
And Mr. Hastings from Florida.
Judge Hastings will be handling this for the Democratic Party. Okay, Judge.
Mr. Chairman, my colleague from California rightly asked, do we know whether or not we are going to see an immigration bill this week?
Thank you very much. First of all, let me answer the first question first. Our next meeting is scheduled for 3 o'clock p.m. tomorrow on amendment consideration to H.R. 6157 and to report a rule for H.R. 200, which is the Strengthening Fisheries Communities and Increasing Flexibilities in Fisheries Management Act. The answer to the second part is that these darn Republicans want to talk with each other again. And so what we're trying to do in our conference is to come together now off of the what might be known as Good Lat 2 and to come to some agreement therein. And so right now, I have not called a meeting, but our conference will get itself together. As you know, we came back this afternoon, votes this evening, and then we'll figure that out.
Mr. Chairman?
Did that answer the distinguished gentleman? Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Can I make a radical suggestion?
Yes, sir.
Maybe the Republicans should talk to those darn Democrats.
Well, I've talked to you about it for a number of years and told you that I did believe, and you remember Mr. Polis said, when you bring that up here and you give, essentially, I'm not trying to quote him, but essentially, if you take, we need to take DACA recipients, deal with them fairly, take them out of the shadows, give them a process where they can go work. He'd be for that, and that's what we're attempting to do, among other things. And then lastly, to have the President of the United States sign the bill, so probably there's a thing or two that he wants. And I think we're trying to deal fairly with these DACA recipients, some 600,000 people. So that's still what my party is going to struggle with.
Well,
Chairman, just a moment.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. Jim.
Yeah, I just, again, I mean, I think we would get a lot more done if we kind of approach some of these issues in a bipartisan way, but I'll keep on hoping, but it appears that's not going to be the case with this bill, so that's unfortunate, but I yield back.
Yes, sir. Judge Hastings.
I just was going to ask you, Mr. Chairman, do you understand our consternation, not so much with the Republican Party congresspersons, but when the President repeatedly says that Democrats are the particular cause of the ongoing issues with reference to immigration. That's just simply not true. And it's very disturbing that that pattern continues. I listened to the press secretary today. The constant refrain that if Democrats would come to the table, following on what my colleague Mr. McGovern just said, hey, you know, you all have the prerogative to talk among yourselves, but I assure you we would be ready and willing to meet anywhere, anytime with our Republican colleagues on this particular issue, and it should not continue. I've been here 25 years. You've been here a long time, and through Republican and Democratic administrations and majority and minority considerations of the House, And the simple fact of the matter is we've not been willing to bite the bullet. It's not going to get any better unless we decide that we can figure this thing out. I just, for the life of me, don't understand it. This isn't the first time this nation has been confronted with immigration issues. And apparently in earlier iterations of Congress, they were better prepared to deal with the comprehensive nature of immigration in spite of the changes. I was just handed a book by one of our colleagues, and it opens with, in 1923, 47 nationalities arrived at our shores. And that goes on and on and on and on. And it isn't all about Mexico and the Northern Triangle. It's a whole lot about immigration. And the DACA recipients are being treated absolutely wrong. We could put a standalone DACA measure, no matter whether it came from the Republicans or anybody else, and it would pass the House of Representatives, and it should be done, and it's not a good thing that we're not doing it. So when you talk to the president, you tell him at least one person believes that we would come to the table if we knew where the table was and who was setting it.
Judge, I want to say this. I do believe that we're better when we work together. And today we saw an example of two members who came forthrightly to talk about difficult issues. And one member said when another member approached them that she tried to do her best to not only effectively see whatever the issue was, but to effectively communicate it.
They could do it on defense. If you think about how, what is that, substantially $2/3 of $1 trillion that they deal with, and they manage to work together. That's because there's give and take, particularly on the Appropriations Committee and other committees of jurisdiction. But it's just not right, Mr. Chairman. We shouldn't be in this particular situation. I'm not talking about you and me. It's our leadership on either side of the aisle, either side of this Congress, and certainly this president, has brought a lot of this particular crisis that we are confronted with on himself. And he need not dump it on me. I don't have an attitude of not wanting to work on immigration. I live immigration. I have as many nationalities in the congressional district that I serve as any member of this body. And that said, I would be happy to sit down with any Republican and all of the Republicans to talk about sensible and comprehensive immigration.
Yes, sir, and I don't want to rehash old things. I don't, but I brought a bill up that did not harm Obamacare at all. And I offered it this committee and told them I would go through all 183 pages. And we talked about health care, and people want to be included, and people want to work together, and people want to do things. I brought a bill together, spent 18 months on it, and thought I could at least get a chance to entice by being fair. And about 2 Democrats did come forth and meet with me and said they liked it. That was the end of the feedback. So I will say to you, I do agree with you. I'd like to work together. I brought a bill that was honest, legitimate, offered it 5 times. And I couldn't get a taker, and that used to be an important issue. So I do know these are hard things.
Do you think we need a new authorization for the use of military force? I'm talking about you. Do you think we need it?
Yes, sir, and I have.
Me too.
Good. And I would encourage us to know that, as you know, we had a number of issues. One bill that I tend to like is called Kaufman, the Kaufman Amendment, on that issue, where he expresses his ideas about that. I've talked directly with Chairman Royce about that, and he is looking at that. That is his jurisdiction, and I do continue to have those discussions.
You just spoke, Mr. Chairman, about your bringing measures here. I respect that. Mr. McGovern, I can't remember a time that we have had an opportunity to discuss the authorization of military force that he has not brought measures here that were not made in order. The same for Ms. Lee. Ms. Lee had a measure that was supposed to incrementally give us a work around to get to it, and we still haven't been able to do it. I don't understand.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just say one final thing, because I share Mr. Hastings' views on the AUMF, and I'm under no illusion that we're going to get an amendment to the Defense Appropriations Bill. But you mentioned your health care bill.
Yes, sir.
And if you recall, I think we offered to make it an order, and you voted no.
You did.
So I don't know, if I were the chairman of the Rules Committee and I had a bill that I wanted to make, I'd just make it an order.
Yes, sir. But let me be honest, and I do appreciate the gentleman. Not one Democrat came to offer me advice about how to make the bill better. And that's what we're in discussion to, not what we make an order. And the gentleman knows that.
Well, I'm just...
Ms. Torres?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the words of my son, who was a former Air Force military enlisted, when the House, and I was not here in Congress at the time, did not pass the authorization, the military authorization, he said, I wish those members of Congress would not tie women's health issues with my paycheck, because I don't have that choice. I show up every single day. I'm ready to be deployed anywhere in the world, and I'm serving my country. I'm not serving the men of my country. I'm serving, our country. So that was his ask back then. Regarding the legislation that hopefully we'll be hearing on Wednesday, I think kudos that you're still talking about it, that the Republican caucus is still revisiting, the strategy around how this bill is going to come forward. Even though the Democrats are not being consulted, you do have the USA Act, you do have the Clean Dream Act. I hope that they will utilize that as a way to look for areas where we can agree and we can move a bill together. I also want to make myself and the members of the Central America Caucus available. I have no other way to communicate this, so I'm communicating it here to you. We're a group of members that are working on a bipartisan way to deal with root causes of migration. We're focused on the U.S. strategy in the Northern Triangle, overseeing every single dollar of taxpayers' money that has been invested in the region and ensuring that we can help change the environment in these countries where children don't have to flee, and holding those governments accountable for what we are seeing in our southern border. That has been, the primary work. Because we don't work on immigration issues, we get along very well, and we move things together. So I'm just making all of those things available to you should you need any additional information on any.
And I appreciate that very much. Is there any further discussion that the committee would wish to have with me? I want to thank each of you for not only taking time to express your ideas, but to know that I sincerely appreciate your service on this committee. And it is a tough role, and it is difficult, and I encourage you to continue your not only content and dialogue with me, but to know that you should expect me to respond accordingly. I told the gentleman, Mr. Polis, a year ago, we're going to have something. I felt like my party, the momentum, the opportunity would be there, and we're trying our best. We actually had one on the floor and had to pull it off ourselves. And for whatever reason, it did not pass. So we're going to keep trying at this, and I want to thank each of you very much. Is there any other business before the committee this evening? If not, we're now finished with our work for the day. her